Right, so fellow Ghanaians, a very good evening to all of you, and thank you very much for joining us here on Upfront on the Joy News channel. It's a Wednesday evening, and it's the 17th day of March 2021. You know that because it's 17th of March, and also because it's just a second day after Parliament started debating the 2021 budget. We'll tell you more about the budget today, but just by way of information what's happening in the country, because Daniel Yaw-Domelevo, immediate past Auditor General, now he's had a letter from the Audit Service Board Chairman, Mr. Edward Duajaman, Professor Edward Duajaman, asking him to hand over, which he hasn't done. And he's written and he's told them, well, he was never handed over to when he returned from his leave. And so if they want him to hand over, they should bring him back. Then he can do the handing over and go back. But that's just by way of what's happening in the country. Tonight, our focus is on the 2021 budget. Lots of issues have been discussed when it comes to the 2021 budget. But one thing I want us to focus on is the taxes in this year's budget. Yes, I know you may have had conversations about the taxes. Also because there's been talk about COVID-19 and how COVID-19 has affected the Ghanaian economy. Tonight, we're going to be learning, for instance, the new taxes, how much they are expected to generate to the Ghanaian economy, and the fact that you are expected not to just pay it in 2021, but over the medium term. Look, if you look at the COVID-19 levy, and I'll be rolling it up shortly so you would see it, COVID-19 levy. Now, that levy is expected to generate about 600 million Ghana cedis. As you can actually see there, 889 million Ghana cedis. That's COVID-19 health levy. Now, that's the 1% added to the National Health Insurance Levy. And as you can see on your screen, this is in 2020. And in fact, if we should bring it down a bit, you see 2021, 2022, 2023, and 2024. Now, what that means is that you're just not paying for 2021 as you think, but you will be paying for 2022, 2023, and 2024. You can see the amounts highlighted for you. And so just bear that in mind, and we'll be talking more about this. But also one thing you must notice is that when it gets to the sanitation tax, which is 10 pesos, also imposed, so that's pollution and sanitation levy. As you can see, when it gets to other revenue, pollution and sanitation levy, now that is also for a 4-year period, starting from 2021, and we're expecting some 311 million in 2021. So that's a bit of taxes that we're expected to pay. Of course, this is not all the taxes we're expected to pay, but as you can see, all the taxes that are going to be introduced are not just for this fiscal year, as some of you have started thinking and you believe that by end of year you would be fine. That is not the situation. Of course, the managers of the economy will tell you that it could be that after everything, that will be the end. And then we get to COVID-19. There's been lots of conversation about COVID-19. What I want to do this evening, also because we've heard that, well, because of COVID-19 and how it cost the economy, we're supposed to pay more. Watch this critically. So if you look at, let's go back, let's look at the previous one so you can just see and have the understanding of it. Now, the Coronavirus Alleviation Program. This is status of COVID-19 alleviation program. And as you can see, provision of food packages. Now that cost us 12 million. Provision of dry food packages, 42 million. And so we approved 329 million. 863,000, spent 329,864,000. You can see the allowance of basic salary for 10,000 frontline health workers, busing of health workers in Accra, Tema, and Kumasi, and how much it cost us. Now, in total, including the cab bus, we're told that cost us 1,201 million Ghana cedis. Okay? Okay. Let's watch something then. Then you go to my next slide. Watch this. So the CAP bus program, or the CAP program, It's written there, 1,201,000,000 Ghana cedis. And then you have our emergency preparedness and response plan costing us 532 million Ghana cedis. Add all to it, COVID expenditure funding, 1,734,530,274. Then you get to the next expenditure item, and this is very, very instructive. Because here, you have the IMF giving Ghana some 5.8 billion Ghana cedis. Well, that was, we allocated 5.8 billion. We got 5.56 billion. And we also got funds from the AFDB and the EU, 389 million, 504 million, and finally got a COVID-19 bond of 10 billion from the Bank of Ghana. Watch what it was used for: deficit financing. Deficit financing in total taking us to 18,194,895,406.53 Ghana cedis. If you had any doubts on how much we spent on COVID-19, what we have done simply this evening is to show you what we spent. My name is Winston Amwa, and welcome to Upfront Today. Tonight, we're going to be breaking down a lot of these things and what they mean for you and I, and the justification for it, where we justified in the imposition of taxes in the first place. And when we talk about deficit financing, the simple explanation because of COVID-19 may be, well, we had total revenue projection for 2020 at 67 billion Ghana cedis. What we did was to reduce it to 53 billion Ghana cedis. However, we increased our expenditure, and that we are told would have to be accounted for by borrowing. And so that deficit financing is what you see there. But in between that, we enjoyed free water, and as the information minister has explained to all of us, it was free to us, but it wasn't free to the treasury, and so we have to pay for it. But if we're paying for it, why are we still being given free water? Why is the free water extended to June 2021 when we are told that we have to pay for it? Shouldn't that be scrapped so that we know that we're paying for our water? Bearing in mind that information indicates that about 70% of expected beneficiaries did not benefit from the free water. When I return after these few messages, I'll be introducing my guest. My name is Winston Amwa, and together we get straight into the 2021 budget as we do all the analysis here on Upfront. Thank you very much for staying with us. This is Upfront on the Joy News channel. I'm Winston Amwa, and tonight we've been joined by Michael Boateng, who is a chartered tax practitioner. He knows a lot when it comes to taxation. He works with KPMG. Michael, good evening. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Winston. Thank you for the opportunity.
Great. So let's start the conversation, because we do know that the information minister has told us free water was free for us, but it wasn't free to the treasury, and that we have to pay for it some way, somehow. He's talked about the COVID expenditure. We've shown the figures. But is it then prudent that we have had to pay for something which we enjoyed last year because we needed, to have a disposable income in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, and we are still told that persons who are lifeline consumers are enjoying the same thing which we are supposed to be paying for? Isn't it about time we faced reality?
Thank you. And it's a very interesting question. And I think let me start by giving a background, because there are a lot of questions being asked as whether whether it's worth it for the government to undertake all these measures. You know, some call it stimulating the economy, some call it poverty alleviation. There are so many examples that you can name that you can have. In all these discussions, one thing that we are missing is that COVID actually, and one of the underlying issues or risk was national stability. Mm-hmm. That was so critical. And sometimes when you're looking at the numbers, because we can't quantify national stability, we may lose part of that. And let me give you an example. You know, during that time, the hotel industry, actually, some were operating less than even around 10%. There was a large number of workers who were laid off or their hours were reduced. During that time when there was the lockdown, I mean, transportation was just shut. Everything was to the standstill. Food, you look at even, I mean, certain industries were just out because entertainment industry, a lot of them were out. So in the midst of everything, if you take a step back, you are going to say that, well, this is something that if it continues, and any person sitting there can say that, well, if I allow this to continue and I want to maintain a very strong balance sheet of economy and those things, it will blow you in your face. Now, that definitely will cause anybody to say, listen, now let me put a lot of these monies into these people to want for national stability. I think that's one thing that we hardly even talk about. Very, very important. Because you and I will be here, somebody in the street who doesn't have food will walk onto us and say, listen, I'm hungry. So these are things that we can't quantify. Mm-hmm. But in the midst of all these things, we had the issue, as you are rightly saying, that now some are still enjoying that. That is not something that is more from a policy point of view, but I just want to have...
Yeah, but talking about the national policy,
yeah.
Government in itself recognized the need to invest in the productive sectors of the economy. Mm-hmm. When the president talked about the availability of the 3 billion guaranteed facility for businesses, large businesses to go for, we also introduced the Coronavirus Alleviation Revitalization Enterprise Scheme for businesses, or for the whole country. And we said we're going to invest in the productive sectors of the economy. The idea was that by doing so, we'll be able to generate enough revenue, people will be able to pump in those revenues into the economy, we would get taxes, and then move forward. So if you know this, and if you know the fact that businesses, particularly the hospitality sector, complained bitterly of the struggles they went through, why did we choose to go for that particular situation, which we've had to pay now?
There are a lot of things that when some of the decisions being made, we always have to look at. Mm. Some decisions or measures are taken, and because of the short term, because there are certain things that you need to just take because you want short-term results. Some you want medium term, some long term. So I think we may have to look at all this things in a broad perspective. Mm-hmm. Now, going back to your point about the hotel industry and those things, I think and that's why we're having this conversation. You know, the rebates which have been given. Now this proposed rebates which have been proposed in the national budget is something that now industry players are giving us a feedback. Say, listen, granted, it's certain there, but...
Yeah, but Michael, my question is, based on what we know now, was it prudent engaging in free water supply, which we are told that about 70% of expected beneficiaries did not benefit, an indication that whoever was supposed to supply the water could have gone to government and said, I supplied water to these and that person, because government said, oh, come, supply the water, indicate to us how much it would cost you on the average, and we will pay. These persons could have gotten money from government without even paying taxes, all in the name of COVID-19, when you and I, who were expected to benefit initially, did not get anything. I have always paid for water, even during the period of the free water last year. So how prudent was that expenditure, which we are now told we have to pay for with imposition of taxes?
And if you look at it from a broader perspective, and I keep bringing it because I am looking at it from a policy point of view, rationale and the impact. Mm-hmm. In the practical aspect of it, sometimes there may be challenges. Those issues we can discuss. But from the point of view of, and that's what is driving this COVID-19 tax that we are talking about, because they all stem into that tax. If you look at it very well, as I mentioned, during that period, you couldn't just wait to come up with certain, because you need to spend to actually to just keep the economy moving. And I give you the example of in the US when they had their own crisis. During that period, the discussions that had at the executive level was not holding this. They said, listen, let's spend to take us out of this issue.
Great.
So that and it was interesting that Angela Merkel, who is one of the most prudent and very, very one of the most I'll call them very disciplined person in terms of expenditure, said, listen, this is not time to talk about these things. Let's spend our way out. And so, granted, you may have those challenges about whether it was prudent and those, but at the bottom line is that there was an expenditure that was made to take. But as I mentioned earlier on, the discussion definitely will go into the tax policy.
Exactly.
Where
yes, go ahead.
Yes, to go to the tax policy. Now, in your earlier submission, you raised a point that we are in the country where, and you raise the numbers looking at 2021, 2022, 2023, and the numbers that will be raking into the government. Yes, and as a tax practitioner, I think this is one of the key things which I'm happy that.
We'll get to your happiness about that,
yes.
But let's get back to one simple.
Yes.
So there's a policy of providing free water,
yes,
free electricity,
yes,
particularly when it comes to electricity to lifeline consumers, yes, and 50% for other consumers. Yes. The idea of the water, for instance, is to help cushion people so they have more disposable income.
That's correct.
They spend, and that is expected to stimulate economic growth, because as we have money, we would spend. I am saying, 3 months into the implementation, government had the complaints. People said, I do not get free water and I still pay for it. You continued for 6 more months after the first period elapsed in June. If you do that, that policy should be evaluated to see if it is achieving the right result. If it is not achieving the right result and yet you continue with it for somebody to enjoy, how do you justify a decision to come back and say, pay more because of this, when the evidence on the ground does not suggest that the people you wanted them to enjoy, enjoyed?
And that's a great question. And I think that's what some of the questions that need to be posed. But one thing that you shouldn't lose sight of is that the effects of COVID-19 is still with us. It's going to continue with us for a long time. So a lot of the things which have been done that maybe from where we sit, we may think that, well, now we don't really need it. The lingering effects are still there. And one of the things that, and I'll take you back to the budget. We had an estimate of spending money on students. And one of the questions was, why do you have to spend this? But the question is that it's also goes with the same principle. This COVID-19, I can tell you that from discussions and even advanced, they are all talking about sometimes 4 years for everybody, for them to get out of this. So you are likely to see some policies that are likely to be lingering. But then you go back to your question is, we need to make sure that we assess them on a case by case.
Good. So
that if it's not working, then whether do we need to redirect that effort? And these are all questions that we need to ask, and it is very, very relevant to ask.
And talking about that, for instance, couldn't the government, having promised while campaigning for re-election, said we're going to remove the guarantor system, actually implement the tax identification number system of having national IDs at tax identification numbers, give these university students loans to go through schooling or their education, which they would refund to the state, or which they would pay back. For many of us who went to universities, we took the SNP loan at the time. Couldn't that have been done? So at least you know that after the completion of education, you're going to come back to come and pay, rather than wholesale free.
And I keep coming back to the point, and I know sometimes you ask the rationale, you want to identify the rationale, and these are questions for the policymakers, especially those. But I think these are questions that you need to ask. But for me, as somebody who when I look at my practice, where it's spend to move the country or the economy moving, ease things up, or to collect to make sure that you spend. Those are my primary.
Yes, but in this case, you would have spent. You'd have put the money into the system.
Yes.
But you'd have deferred the payment to those who are, enjoying from it. So you enjoy from it with, a deferred period. You come back and pay for it.
Exactly.
And so here,
exactly,
it's not going to impact all of us, but the beneficiaries.
Exactly. And I think I'm happy that you raised the question of deferring, because the deferment is one of the key positive stimulants that we have. Now, I will take you back to the budget. One of the deferral destinies, with you for the vehicle income tax. Mm-hmm. You see, listen, let's assume that and it's paid on a quarterly basis. If you have about 1,000 Ghana cedis or 200 Ghana cedis to be paid in this quarter, and we really talked about those three quarters. Those quarters that they raise, you get to know that money, use it for something else. And then that's 20 cedis a quarter. I know, but then it's
60 cedis for a year.
I know, but
you spend more than that.
I know.
In buying fuel. So why do you do that and think that you've cushioned me?
But one thing that you are failing to realize that they could have raised those taxes and not even talk about those.
Yeah, but the point is, yes, but the point
because
you are impacting me more than you're cushioning me. You're hurting me more than you're cushioning me.
I think one thing that you should understand is that from taxation. Look at the 2020 numbers of the country. We spent a bulk of the tax revenue on interest payment and compensation. Interest payment and compensation. Compensation, we're looking at around 26%. Interest payment was around 31%. That is huge. If you look at it, it's like we don't have any. So the question is, somebody's raising the question that is even our compensation, is it effective? That is another conversation that we should have. So it goes back to the point that we find ourselves, if you look at the numbers, tough choices have to be made. And I think that is, and I'm not speaking for anyone, but I'm just speaking that when you read the rationale behind some of these specific targeted taxes that we raise, these are some of the things that we need to look at. And some of the discussion we need to look at is what is the effect on the economy? How does it address the key concerns or objectives that the government want to achieve with these policies, and how do we assess and hold people accountable? And I think that's a very good conversation also to look at.
Yes, we'll take them one after the other.
Yes.
But if you look at the effect it has, so this is what government intends to do. Government thinks that it's a nice way of putting money in the pockets of people, and so once they have these monies, they'll be able to spend. But this is the government, and you raised a question about interest payments, because in the 2021 budget, you're looking at about over 60 billions going into interest payments and compensation of employees. So in effect, all that is left for us, we have to borrow. And that's why out of a projected revenue of 72 billion, we'd have to borrow an additional 41 billion to meet our expenditure of 113 billion. But this is a government, particularly so when the government campaigned on moving the country from taxation to production. Now, that's not for you to answer, but I'm just saying, when you campaign on moving the country from taxation to production, by end of 2019, our 2020 budget, we were still looking at a budget deficit in excess of 18 billion Ghana cedis. Certainly not that country which was on the path of moving from taxation to production.
And you're right. I mean, you don't expect me to answer that question because of the political undertone. But then, if you look at it if you look at what actually has caused all this, because if you look at the deficit, it has actually been around the debt to GDP, which is driving the interest rate 50s. Then, as we are getting closer, COVID and all those things, the numbers were shooting up. But then, let's take a step back. It goes back to the point that you raised about. Government spending money where to stimulate economy, or you're saying that you're going to move from taxing base to business income generation base to run the company, the country. These are all issues to be looked at. But I think one of the things which I keep saying, and then you and I have had that discussion, is that whenever we are looking at all these policies which is being up there, we always have to take a step back and look at it, because where we are now, and all the taxes that we have raised, looking at the COVID, national, the financial service, for the financial sector, then you look at the energy. These are the driving force. So you can have those discussions, but for us as tax practitioners, we want to then at least assess the impact on the people, but then we wouldn't go into the policy whether.
So let's look at the impact on the people, and starting off with petroleum products. 10% sanitation pollution levy, 10 pesos. 20 pesos excise this thing, 30 pesos, currently fuel prices 5.45 per liter. How is this going to impact you and I and the ordinary Ghanaian?
And that is one of the greatest, one of the great questions that we need to, and these are questions that we need to stimulate every day. Now look at the sanitation levy, this levy that we are looking at. Come to think about it, you and I walk through Accra, and I don't know how happy you are with the letter, how the places. And the interesting thing is that sometimes we may look at the environment, whether it's clean or what, but then the health implications. I can tell you for a fact that there was a research that showed that if you live in a clean environment, you are not going to you can have mosquito issues reduced, malaria and all those things. Now, if you go to hospitals, all these are some of the biggest, one of the causes of sickness in the country. Can you imagine if you can eliminate all this and people are healthy and people are at work, how much we don't have to spend on going to hospitals, how many more hours that you can put in work? These are all things that we need to look at. So that if you say that you are going to put in this levy on sanitation, explain that I'm not only looking at the point of maybe making the place clean, but it has an economic implication. I'm going to make sure that everybody is healthy when we are able to reduce diseases that can be avoided. All these things have to be looked at. Secondly, what do you think about the fact that maybe now with all these things, there could be programs or projects that can be looked at and then can be run in terms of investing in maybe very big projects that can help with taking care of our, what do you call it, our refugees. So from a tax perspective, I as a tax person, I will just raise those questions. That these are things that we may have to look at.
So I mean, before we go for a break, and also from a tax point of view, the whole idea of progressive taxing.
Yes.
If I earn more, I can afford.
Yes.
I pay and pay more to cater for those who cannot afford.
Yes.
There are residential areas in this country.
Yes.
The waste they generate, they must pay for it. There's a polluter pays system.
Yes.
How about in those areas, they pay more? And I pay for, waste. Every 6 months where I live, I have to pay, okay, to the managers of the facility. Now, having paid that, it is expected that that particular payment I have made is used to take care of conveying or taking that waste and taking it to the landfill site. Why can't we decide to do that and as a result spare the ordinary man the effect of a rising petroleum price, an increasing transport fare, a rising inflation, which in extension affects his very survival? Think about it. When we return after this short break, we get to answer that question. This is Upfront on the Joy News channel. We'll be right back. Right, so welcome back, and thank you very much for staying with us here on Upfront on the Joy News channel. I'm Winston Amma, and Michael Barton is a chartered tax practitioner. He's joined us here. He's helping us understand a few issues. So before we went for the break, I asked that question about the pollution and sanitation levy, 10 pesos on petroleum products. And I say, why couldn't we have actually charged those in residential areas to pay more to cater for this expenditure rather than spread it across, and by so doing, impacting the ordinary Ghanaian so much because fuel prices go up, transport fares, and they've started engaging already because they want to increase transport fares, and then that leads to a rising inflation. And by the end of it all, people start complaining about times being hard for them.
And Westerner, as where we ended, we were raising the issue of whether this tax is progressive enough or is it regressive, what are we trying to achieve, and all those things. If you take a step back, this is more of a regressive, because you see that since it's a fix, the poor would definitely spend more of its effect on the lower income earner is constant, so that will take a portion of their income. The higher income earner has a fix, so they can spare. But then you go back to the point about how much is the government trying to get to undertake some of these projects in terms of solving this sanitation issue. There are certain times that depend looking at how our tax structure is and tax administration, and also because of the issue of the number of people in the tax net and all those things. Sometimes it becomes very difficult, and in terms of cost effectiveness, one of the easiest way is to have that on the consumption and make sure that those who are actually charging or self-providing actually collecting on behalf of the government. But then that's another aspect of the discussion. But then it goes back to the point of some of these, and these are all, I would say, proposed, policies in the budget, which I know the Parliament will discuss, others will discuss, and it's possible that by the time we finish, either it may not be so, it may not come to pass.
Well, it's been factored into our revenue generation for 2021, so it tells you the importance of it. But you've talked about it being regressive, so clearly that's something we need to take a second look at, because the low-income earner, at the end of it all, may suffer more. And if I were to look at 10 pesos on a liter, you're looking at 45 pesos per gallon of fuel. And so if I buy 15 gallons, I'm looking at around less than 10 Ghana cedis, a week. In a month, I'm looking at 40 Ghana cedis. You're looking at 480 Ghana cedis in a year based on my kind of consumption. You may be consuming more, but the impact of it will be felt more by that person that we seek to cushion. How about the 20 pesos or so? And still on petroleum, because another 20 pesos is being added. I'm sure it's the same, line of argument for you.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go to NHI levy. 1%, which we are told we're going to be generating 889 million Ghana cedis from. Was that necessary?
As to whether it's necessary or not, I wouldn't want to say yes or no, but was it prudent, especially if you look at where we are. You see, one of the challenges, one of the solutions that we have in Ghana in addressing the most one of the key limited tax administration in Ghana is the tax net. There are a lot of people that are within the direct income tax net. So that's the one that we hear people talking about. As for indirect, which is on the consumption, if you don't want to pay that tax, then don't go and consume the item.
But you will consume.
Exactly. But then it's also easy to collect. And sometimes if you don't fault, you may not fault at the managers of the economy. Let me give you an example. There are certain states that I know decide to just go away with direct tax, but they focus on consumption because it's more effective to collect. You don't spend so much money to collect. It's self-reporting and it's easier to collect. So depending on what you're looking at, if you want to collect a revenue for a specific project with a less cost of collection to make sure that cost-benefit analysis makes sense, then you can, indirect consumption tax is one of the best ways.
Yeah, but in this time that you want me to consume more so that, you generate taxes if it's going up, and you say if you don't want to, then you need money. If I don't consume, you don't get the money.
Exactly, and that's one of the limitations. So definitely when you are applying, when those taxes are being applied, they will look at the elasticity of the demand of the product. Then they will factor cushion in all those things. But let's not, I don't want us to go back into those things. But what I want to look at is, what is the effect? Definitely with that being a levy, for instance, the national health, it will have an impact of increasing the price of certain goods and services applicable. And then it's also increased the cost of operations of businesses because the NHO was a credit. Now it became a levy, which is a tax deductible item. Therefore, you cannot take the 100% credit for how much you incurred. But then back to the point, and let's go back to the spirit of this whole thing. The main issue that has brought this discussion are the three items that I will keep raising: the COVID, financial cleanup, and then energy. And one of the things which, as I mentioned, is that now we have this specifically saying that this is for COVID. So every year you and I can say that, okay, this is how much you said you will collect. You've collected that. What did you use it for? Now, unfortunately for us in Ghana, as we are saying, we have a national stabilization levy, which was supposed to actually have expired long time ago, but every administration will come and they keep renewing it. And then for some reason, you ask yourself, do you really need to do this? So I'm hoping that in about 6 years' time, when COVID is just behind us, and we see this, now you and I can say that, okay, why do we still have this here? Because we thought this was for this. And I think that's why I said it was good that we have that specific, because they're saying that you are having this tax for this specific project. And I think it's good for us as a tax administrator to make sure that there's some level of accountability and oversight. And I think that's some of the things that I wanted to raise.
So we go to the financial sector.
Yes.
5% profits before tax.
Yes.
You see, and that we're told is to offset the cost of the financial sector cleanup. Questions are being raised about how this is going to impact the financial sector and whether the financial sector should be bearing this cost of the financial sector cleanup.
And, that question had been raised. That was raised this morning in some discussions, and the question was, but there are two schools of thoughts. Mm-hmm. Some are saying that, listen, the banks have been the biggest beneficiaries, or they're the largest beneficiaries of the financial cleanup. Their financials are looking better. Their profitability is on the rise. Some numbers are good. So the assumption is that if you enjoy this, then you should also help to alleviate the issue. Then the question that you raised was, why these banks? Because definitely it's going to affect their cost of doing business, which may trickle down to how much fees and those that we will pay, so that those costs can be passed on to the users of these banks, depending on the bank's policy. But at the end of the day, that's the rationale of this. And if you read the budget, it talks about either 2024, it not be renewed, and we will look at it. The interesting thing, which I mentioned earlier on, is that with all these things in play, now we can hold them, the managers are accountable and say, okay, this is how much you said the cleanup cost. This is how much has been raked in. Do we still need this? These are questions, because now
shouldn't the managers be holding themselves accountable for all of this? Because they supervise the financial sector cleanup. They released reports which told us of how banks had mismanaged. They released reports that told us that they had engaged in related party borrowing and had acquired other properties which they were going to go after. If this is the case, why must those that are surviving now be bearing the cost?
And I sometimes it's just was it the chicken before the hen? The question, and that's the question that you always face. And I always use the example as I mentioned earlier on, when the U.S. crisis came, the financial crisis. Those questions about who was responsible or not, they said, let's get all these things, then we hold them accountable. Now, and I don't want to go into the details of, but in terms of making sure that national stability and those things, any person who knows the impact that these things can raise will make sure that let's get this out of the way before we look at the others. Now, I think recently we had...
But before you look at the others, we're getting it out of the way. We've gotten it out of the way. Yeah. You've been able to take care of the sector cleanup. You're bearing this cost now. If you pass it on to the people, you take the money, then what happens?
That's the question that the administrators and managers will have to answer. But then if you take a step back, you could see that all these cleanup recently...
One of the reasons we should be getting the managers to be accountable now, rather than say, oh, let's finish this before. Because it's been the first, 2 banks that were added to GCD. It was on the 17th of August, 2017. 4 years after this, you released a report, Capital Bank, UT Bank, the Builders Report, talked about all the things that they did. It's been 4 good years. In 2018, 5 were merged. 3 years. What has happened?
You know, it's quite interesting about justice. I mean, definitely, these are not within my pay, but then you get to know that when cases are in court, you know, sometimes it can be slow, but I don't want to get there. But I think from a tax perspective, you know, looking at it, and especially with where we are now, especially with where, because the cleanup was one of the causes, because it had a lot of impact on the current position. I mean, national financial position, and that needs to be clear. As to whether the people who did it, that is another issue that needs to be looked at from a management point of view. But I think one of the things that we shouldn't look, and I keep saying that we cannot quantify, is the effect, the national stability. Because I can tell you that the number of...
Some of these things could also affect national stability. What we are doing now.
Agree.
The imposition of taxes could affect national stability.
Agree. But that time, there are a lot of pensioners who have put their money in this. There are people who, and even with some of these things that the government has done, you will get to know that even there are people who might have lost their lives in those things. But even that is after the government has said. But I'm not even going to go there. Looking at it from a tax perspective, and that's why I keep the excitement about having all these timelines, all these goals and those things, so that at least we can hold them the managers accountable. And I think that's the excitement of it. In terms of the policy, execution of those things, that is another level of discussion about the effectiveness. But when you look at the spirit and where it is going, I think that is where we need to look and have those discussions. Make sure that those intangibles are quantified. That's why...
Michael, the point you make, pensioners have their money. Yeah. There are pensioners who, up to today, send messages to me every day on the Super Morning Show, every other day on the Super Morning Show, talking about how their funds are still locked up. Not everybody has been paid.
And I think that's more from execution.
Yes, but you see, the point you make, the government had to bear this cost and all of that. If government bears the cost, and if the government transfers banks, you consolidate banks, what it means is that their credits, their assets, you can go after their assets. And over here, not just, their physical assets, their loans are also there, which you can go for and get persons to pay. And this could go a long way. But let's get into the positives. But before we do the positives, road tolls likely to go up. That's something that the government says is now going forward will be adjusting it based on inflation. You think that's the way to go? These
are some of the limitations, and we had the same discussions, because if you look at the budget statement, the projections, we are looking at around 8% inflation. Now, some of these are more or less, I would say, this effect will definitely lead to inflation to some degree, and I can't say how much. But I think it goes back to the point about the, are the tolls what we are paying realistic? Because now we all want good roads. We want make sure that we have a lot of amenities, and all this has to be paid for. Now, if you look at the budget statement 2020, we only had around 11% sitting out there, for capital expenditure. And you and I know how much capital expenditure that we are looking for. We want good roads, we want good infrastructure for digitization, all those things. We want hospitals, we want this. And within the budget, we are looking at around 11%. So these are some of the challenges that we all have to face. But I think these discussions will have to be made, so that at least when people are paying and sacrificing and paying the taxes, they definitely, will have appreciation of the purpose of all these levies.
What are some of the positives in the budget?
One of the positive things in the budget is, and as I mentioned earlier on, that is the waiving of the permanent waiver of taxes on what I would call investment on the Ghana Stock Exchange. And this is the reason why. The stock exchange was set up purposely. One of the ways is for businesses to raise capital. Now, when they raise capital, whereby you and I will go and buy stocks, they use that money to invest. In that course of our investment, at some point we may sell these shares or our interest. When we sell them, we guess they definitely we have gains. Now, when we have the gains, they are typically subject to tax. And all these years, we having maybe deferring, waiving, extending that waiver for about a year or two, and so now it's permanent. What that means that, Winston, now if I have 10,000 Ghana cedis and I invest it in the Ghana Stock Exchange, in a company, and about 10 years down the line, it gets evaluated and I'm looking at 18,000. Now I can dispose it of, that means I have a profit of 8,000. Typically, if my tax bracket, I'm looking at 25%. I'm looking at paying a tax of 2,000 on it. Now with this waiver, the government is saying that, listen, I'm giving you additional 2,000. So you can use the additional 2,000 for something else. That is a big deal. It's sad that usually when we have this conversation on taxes, some of the good things we don't talk about. And also because we have a low compliance rate, a lot of these benefits that you are going to see, that is being talked about, you are going to miss them. And I can tell you for a fact that even before this budget was read, there are a lot of tax benefits out there. But because we don't comply, we don't even have the opportunity to access them. And you get to know that only a few who access them and they enjoy. For instance, another thing which is a very good thing is the enhancement or establishment of the independent, a small arbitration, where tax issues are arbitrated. One of the things that we are facing in tax administration is tax disputes. So when there are tax disputes, you need to pay 30% of the amount before you go. You can after about 60 days, then you have to go to court. Now there is this body that when you have issues, you can go there and resolve this. That is one of the things that is making the tax administration in Ghana very, very, very difficult. And a lot of people just run away because they can't deal with tax disputes. And another thing which has been said, and I know they propose it, is the waiving of tax penalties and interest. When you have tax liabilities, that has been there up to December 31st, 2020. What that means is that if you go into your books now, Winston, and then you're a small business, you go into your books and you realize that you owe taxes on PAYE, withholding tax, VAT, that you know that you haven't done well. I can tell you that if you are on an audit and the amount is assessed, the amount of penalties and interest on this amount will be almost equivalent to the taxes due. So what the government is saying, listen, if you self-report, I'm going to waive all these things for you, all these things. But you have to make sure that by the first quarter of 2021, at least you are complying in terms of all your compliance requirements. So these are some of the positive things, and I'm just hoping and having more platforms where we can have the positive aspects, because a lot of businesses are missing out on these positive benefits. And then at the end of the day, we focus on some of the others, which we may call the difficult ones. And then at the end of the day, we lose sight of the bigger picture. And I think that's something conversation that I hope that we will have more with businesses and others, just to make sure that we are on the same page.
Thank you very, very much, Michael Boateng, for joining us this evening on Upfront on the Joy News channel. Of course, the conversation will continue. We're not stopping the conversation on taxes. We're not stopping the conversation on the budget. Let's keep having this all-important conversation. My name is Winston Amo. Thank you very much for joining us. Up next is the Joy News Prime. Catch you tomorrow on the Super Morning Show. Have a lovely evening.